Hello and welcome. I'm Professor Glenn Torres Spelliscy, and this is the International Policy Podcast Series. Thanks for joining me. In international relations, there are certain problems that seem to last for generations. Unresolved and progressing from year to year with increasing doubts among some members of the international community about the prospects of any type of permanent or lasting resolution. And although it has times taken a backseat to other conflicts, perhaps the greatest policy challenge of our generation, spanning multiple generations, has been trying to come to a solution in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. President after president, state after state, powerful nation after powerful nation have all tried and failed to employ the political capital necessary to resolve the conflict. This situation has frustrated the greatest diplomats in the most powerful nations for over half a century. Why? Well, that's a difficult question to answer. It involved questions of lands, culture, security, and yes, religion, although I'm not sure that religion plays as significant a role as some pundits would have you believe. Mainly, I believe, like most conflicts, the conflict between Palestine and Israel is ultimately about opportunity and who has access to it. Land provides opportunity. Recognition provides opportunity. Peace and security provide opportunity. And when there is a lack of opportunity, extremism becomes a more potent draw, particularly for the most desperate. Now, to cover the entirety of the conflict is too much of a task for what we have time for. It's gargantuan. Indeed, I think there are probably courses you can take at numerous universities which would devote an entire semester to this conflict. We, of course, only have 1 week. So what we're going to do is to focus our attention for lecture and discussion purposes on a more narrow question. The question of whether Palestine should be granted statehood immediately, perhaps even with unsettled borders, or whether we should wait until a negotiated political settlement can be reached. And this is the key question under international law because, as the lecture discusses, a state is imbued with certain rights. It is entitled to a certain level of respect in the international community, rights and respect that the Palestinian nation still does not have, despite the fact that there has been a Palestinian population, that has been a refugee population for many years. And it really is an interesting question because it gets at the heart of a fundamental building block of our international community. What does it mean to be a state in the international sense? If states receive certain rights and responsibilities, what characteristics are required to qualify for statehood? A state is defined by the Inter-American Convention on the Rights and Duties of States, known as the Montevideo Convention, as an entity that has a defined territory, although it doesn't have to be perfectly defined, as Israel was recognized as a state and admitted to the UN prior to its borders being finalized. A permanent population, meaning that cannot be nomadic or seasonal. A government, meaning a government that has sovereignty over its territory and general authority. And finally, the capacity to engage in formal relations with other such entities. This rules out small entities within countries, like the individual states of the United States. So, does Palestine meet these criteria? Well, any discussion of statehood in international law begins with a fundamental principle, the right of self-determination. This principle, that a people have the right to determine their own future, is enshrined at the heart of our international system. The UN Charter lists as one of its primary purposes in Article 1, Sub 2, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen the universal peace. The concept of self-determination was further codified in the UN General Assembly's Friendly Relations Declaration, which provides that all people have the right to freely determine, without external interference, their political status, and to pursue their economic, social, and cultural development, and that every state has the duty to respect this right, and that every state has the duty to promote the realization of the principle, and that every state has the duty to refrain from any forcible action which deprives peoples of their right to self-determination.
As a man of law, I am particularly happy that you have just announced the adoption of the Declaration of Principles of International Law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. This marks the culmination of many years of efforts for the progressive development and codification of the concepts from which basic principles of the Charter are derived.
However, recognizing that allowing different groups of peoples within existing states to declare their own state would result in an untenable fragmentation of the international state system, the international community would limit the application of the principle, for the most part, to the emergence of colonial states into independent statehood. So, should Palestine be awarded statehood and be vested with all the rights and responsibilities, including the right of self-determination included therein? In September 2011, this question was thrust to the forefront of international politics. That's when Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the PLO and the Palestinian representative to the United Nations, submitted a formal application to join the United Nations as a state. An application for statehood, as it was. Now, the U.S. position on this is complicated. The U.S. has been supportive of the establishment of a Palestinian state, the so-called two-state solution, for a long time in our history, and has been supported by both Republican and Democratic presidents. President Trump, who was seen as a close ally of Israel's right-wing, pro-settlement parties, expressed some ambivalence about a two-state solution, stating he would leave the final decision up to the parties.
So I'm looking at two-state and one state, and I like the one that both parties like. I'm very happy with the one that both parties like. I can live with either one. I thought for a while the two-state looked like it may be the easier of the two. But honestly, if Bibi and if the Palestinians, if Israel and the Palestinians are happy, I'm happy with the one they like the best. As far as the embassy moving to Jerusalem, I'd love to see that happen. We're looking at it very, very strongly. We're looking at it with great care, believe me.
President Trump invested significant political capital in trying to come up with a settlement, appointing White House advisor and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, as head of the American peace effort. Controversially, in December 2017, President Trump announced, against the advice of some allies, that the U.S. would officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This did cause consternation amongst many U.S. allies, and the Palestinians reacted very negatively, declaring that the U.S. would not be able to act as an impartial arbiter any longer, and refusing U.S. overtures to meet in December 2017. The Trump administration asserted that it was simply recognizing a reality, that Jerusalem was the seat of the Israeli government. The Trump administration maintained that the announcement was not a final settlement as to the status and sovereignty of Jerusalem, and that those decisions would have to be made during final status negotiations. Weeks later, the U.S. was forced to veto a potential Security Council resolution condemning the decision. The UN General Assembly overwhelmingly passed a resolution condemning the decision, despite threats by the Trump administration that such a vote would have negative consequences. Kushner's plan, called Peace to Prosperity, focused on improving the economic opportunities of young Arabs in the region to give them a future to fight for. Radicalization does seem to concentrate in areas where there is little to no expectation of upward mobility. So Kushner's plan was to increase those opportunities, under the theory that economic development will lead to peaceful relations. Although the Trump administration was unsuccessful in its attempts to get its peace plan off the ground, it did make headway in getting other Arab countries to recognize Israel, with a string of announcements in the fall of 2020 from the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. The four majority Muslim countries are the first to recognize Israel in 30 years. With President Biden's inauguration in January of 2021, it looks like the U.S. is back to its robust support for a two-state solution. The question is, how do you get there? In 2011, the Obama administration opposed the Palestinian statehood application on the grounds that the application was premature. The U.S. position has been that all parties to the conflict must first reach a negotiated solution before a Palestinian state can be recognized. The idea is to hold the carrot of statehood in front of the Palestinians, to convince them to make meaningful concessions in any final status negotiations with the Israelis. Will Biden continue to insist on final status negotiations before a Palestinian state is recognized by the United States? That's the question we're going to be focused on in this week's lecture. The idea of Palestinian statehood and what it means under international law, and how best to approach achieving the U.S. goal of a stable two-state solution in the Middle East. This goal of hopefully a two-state solution could spur further progress in a lot of the other security issues we have in the Middle East. The existence of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is certainly a catalyst for conflict in that region, so resolution would certainly be beneficial to other U.S. security interests. Well, that does it for this week's podcast. Go on to read the lecture book and the textbook, and the other readings, and I will see you on the discussion board.